Number 1. Bang. When I was a young kid, I had a best friend named Mike that I used to hang around all the time. We did everything together for many, many years. We slept over at each other's houses on a fairly regular basis. We really didn't even have to ask our parents' permission when we did so. That was how often we did it. We'd just say, "Hey, I'm sleeping at Mike's tonight," or, "Hey, I'm sleeping at Jack's tonight," and that was all there was to it. I tended to sleep over at Mike's house more often than he did at mine. This was because his dad was a single parent, and he would often work at night. Even when we were really young and shouldn't have been left home alone, we spent a lot of time home by ourselves. The night that this happened, we were 12, and I was over at Mike's house while his dad was working. This night, it was actually storming pretty bad outside, too. We both actually like storms, so that was no big deal. It also put us in a really spooky mood, so we were telling each other creepy stories. I have to admit to getting a little bit scared. We even ordered a pizza, and Mike and I both answered the door to get the pizza. The delivery guy was a new guy, and not the one that we normally had. He asked for our parents to get the pizza, but Mike told them that they were busy and took the pizza. After quite a bit of time scaring ourselves, the storm was getting even worse. Eventually we heard this horrible noise that sounded like something was slammed up against the house. It caused us both to jump, and I was definitely scared. Mike told me that it was probably just the door to the basement. He said that the door didn't latch very good. Occasionally when it was windy, it would get blown open and then slam shut again. It was pretty windy outside that night, so his explanation made sense. We were eating pizza in Mike's bedroom and playing video games when I decided I wanted to get some pop to drink. Mike decided to come with me. We had scared each other so much that I don't think either of us wanted to be by ourselves at that point. So we both left the room and started walking down the stairs to the first floor. Suddenly Mike stopped. He put his arm up to make me stop too. The staircase led to the kitchen, which was in the back of the house. He pointed over to the door, and I saw what he saw. The door was broken. The area around the knob, and of course the lock, was cracked. The door then swayed a little bit in the wind, before suddenly slamming shut hard again. That was the noise that we had heard earlier. If that wasn't scary enough, right after, there was a flash of lightning, which suddenly brightened up the entire house. In the brief second that everything was illuminated, I saw a shadow of a person on the wall of the kitchen. The living room was adjacent to the kitchen, which meant that someone was in the living room of the house. We tried to be quiet as the two of us turned around and hurried our way back up the stairs. There was enough thunder that it was easy for the sounds of us moving around to be drowned out. We made it back to the room and locked ourselves in. I brought up that if the intruder was able to break open the kitchen door, then he should have no problem breaking into the bedroom door. Mike told me to shut up. We called Mike's dad and told him what happened. He told us to stay in the room and not to make a sound. He will come home right away. Mike and I went into his bedroom closet, and we remained in there, listening to the storm while we waited to see what would happen. It didn't take very long before we heard a loud pounding on Mike's bedroom door. We thought it was the intruder until we heard Mike's dad call out to us. Both of us jumped up, ran to the door, and let him in. For those wondering why we called Mike's dad and not the police, Mike's dad was a police officer. He got to the house quickly with his partner before the intruder had a chance to escape, and easily apprehended him. The intruder turned out to be the new pizza delivery guy. I guess when we answered the door, he made the correct assumption that we were home by ourselves, so he broke in and tried to rob us. We still stayed home by ourselves after that, but we started making frozen pizza instead. Number 2. WTF. This is the weirdest damn story to ever happen to me. Personally, I've never had a supernatural experience before, and this wasn't that. But I think this would have been even weirder than seeing a ghost. I was at my cousin Nathan's house for one summer. I enjoyed being there, and we were about the same age, so we spent a lot of our time together. My aunt and uncle both worked evening shifts and lived about 40 minutes out of town, so we had the evenings to do whatever we wanted to do. As fun as that might sound to some, we never really got into any sort of trouble. But there was one night, when we were watching some movies, that a thunderstorm rolled into the area. Unlike where I live now, the storms back then lasted for a while and could get pretty ferocious at points. The lightning was bright and the thunder was really loud. We were watching scary movies, which I always figured boys of that age tend to do. So the storm just amplified how scared we were getting. But maybe because we weren't alone, and we had done this many times before, we were not truly worried about anything. Suddenly, after a bolt of lightning lit up the outside, I heard Nathan yelp. When I asked him what was wrong, he said it looked like there was someone outside the window watching us. Of course, I thought he was joking and trying to scare me, but he did sound like he was pretty scared, and when I looked over in that direction, I thought I saw a figure outside the window too. Quickly, Nathan jumped up and ran to the door, locking it. The figure moved away from the window as quickly as Nathan had got up, so I wondered if he did this to try and get to the door. My question was answered when I heard a loud pounding on the front door. Of course, there was no way we were going to open that door. We were scared out of our minds. We asked who was there, through the door, but he didn't identify himself. He just started yelling in this crazy-sounding voice, "Let me in! I want to get in!" He didn't sound scared or anything. It was a demand, not a plea. "No fucking way," Nathan yelled back, while the man began pounding on the door even harder for a few moments before he stopped. We saw him move away from the door. There were small windows in the door, and realized he might be moving to the back of the house. Both Nathan and I ran to the back door and got there in time to lock it too. But unlike the small windows in the front door, the back door had bigger windows. We were able to see the man, and his appearance made the whole thing creepier. He had a scraggly gray beard and long, wild hair, and when he saw us, he grinned a nearly toothless grin. The man pounded on the door, once again demanding, "Let me in! I want to get in!" He began pounding on the glass, and we thought he was trying to break it. I ran and grabbed a large kitchen knife, while Nathan ran out of the room. I showed the man the knife and told him that he'd better leave, but he kept pounding on the window, finally causing it to break. I think he cut himself too because he yelped, but this didn't keep him from reaching for the door handle to unlock the door. That is when I heard the bang that wasn't thunder. Looking to the side of me, I saw that Nathan had gotten himself one of his dad's guns. He must have fired it, but I don't think he hit the man or the door. I wasn't sure at first what he had hit. The man quickly withdrew his hand from the door, and he moved away from the door. We went to all the windows of the house, looking to see if we could find him, but we couldn't find anything. We couldn't do anything about the window, but we remained in the living room with the gun in case the guy came back. We must have scared him off, though, because he never came back. I thought Nathan would get in trouble for using the gun, but his parents were just happy that we were not hurt. Number 3. L. I live in Chicago, so taking public transportation is a major thing in my life. Anyone who lives in the area knows that if you live or work or go to school close enough to an L station, it can make your whole life a lot easier. Also, contrary to what you might hear on the news from people, being in Chicago is not as dangerous as you might think. There are absolutely dangerous areas, but the crime is concentrated mostly in those areas. I live on the north side. I take the red line a whole lot, and I always feel safe when I do. There was only one time when something really sketchy happened on the red line that scared me. This was back when I was going to school. I didn't live on campus. I had an apartment in Rogers Park, but I needed to use the library resources for a paper that I was writing, so I stayed at school until it was very, very late. As I was finally making my way to the Red Line station, a thunderstorm began to break out. I was on a bus taking me to the station, so it was not a big deal, but I was hoping that the storm would end before I had to walk from my station to my apartment. There weren't very many people on the train that I got on. This wasn't unusual for this time of night, although I can't recall how late it was. But I got on a train and there was this one guy who was sitting there, who immediately began making me feel very nervous. One of the things, whether you were walking in Chicago or taking transportation, you follow the eyes forward, mouth shut rule. You definitely don't stare at people, and this guy began staring at me and wouldn't stop. After a short period of time, I pretended to get a phone call. I got up while talking and started moving toward the front of the car. I then moved into the next car and walked all the way to the end of the car. It was just so uneasy being stared at, and I felt so much better when I got to the other car. It didn't take long, though, before the door between the cars reopened and the guy moved into the car that I had gone to. He didn't get too close to me, but he resumed his staring at me. Like before, he didn't look away at all while he was staring. It was making me get very scared at this point, and I decided I would just get off on the next stop that had people on it and wait for the next train. The very next stop, there were plenty of people waiting on the other side of the platform, so I got up to get off. You can only imagine the feeling that I had when the guy who was staring at me got off the train as well. I kept trying to tell myself that I was unlucky, and I just picked the stop that he was going to get off of anyway. But unlike the others who got off there, he didn't go to exit the station. He went and sat down by a guy who was playing a guitar and just waited. Since I didn't leave either, he must have suspected what my ruse was. He kept staring at me too, and I really didn't know what to do at that point. This was before Chicago started putting guards on the L, so I didn't have someone like that to go to. I decided I would leave the station. You guessed it. As soon as I started to leave, the man got up and began following me. I was very scared going up the steps to get to the exit. This was the first time that I truly felt that I was in some sort of danger on public transportation. I was scared what might happen to me if I got out into the streets. I wondered what this guy might do to me. I hit the luckiest break of my life, though. There was an attendant in the station, and she was talking to a police officer. I exited through the turnstile, and I made my way over to them. Looking back, I noticed that the guy got to the exit, and must have seen the police officer, too. What did he immediately do? He turned and went right back down the steps. That was the final thing that I needed to see, to know the man was indeed following me. I didn't even tell the officer what happened. I went outside where it was still storming, and I found a bus stop. I decided I could wait out in the storm and just take a bus as far as I could, before maybe connecting with the L again. I never saw the guy again. Chicago is a big city, and that is one of the best features of it, is that you can see a person once, and hopefully never again. Number 4. Witness. I really enjoy storms. Really enjoy storms. And I don't just mean thunderstorms. I like normal rainstorms. I like windstorms. I like snowstorms. As long as it is storms, I tend to like it very much. I live in a rundown neighborhood. It's not really bad. There is not a lot of violence or anything like that, but it is definitely the poor part of town, and there are a few weed dealers in the area. And for the most part, it is pretty quiet, but the houses are all pretty old, and for the most part, I didn't know my neighbors at all. Usually, in the very late fall, early winter, we got some really rough windstorms. And this one evening, we got one where the wind was probably 25 miles per hour and up. It got dark early that time of year, so it was already dark. But to make matters worse, I didn't know this exactly when it happened, but the wind was so strong that it broke a tree that fell over a power line and knocked out the electricity for the entire neighborhood. This left me with very little to do, because I didn't have candles to read and couldn't get any light from any other source. I decided that I was going to sit on the porch and watch the storm. It was pretty cold outside, but I got myself a blanket. I had a chair sitting on the porch that I sat down in, and the blanket kept me pretty warm. It was pretty dark outside, and it was really cloudy too, so there was no light from the moon. But after being outside for a little while, my eyes adjusted enough, and it really looked pretty cool outside. Most of what I saw was pretty neat. At one point I watched as a garbage can, from who knows where, rolled down the streets. The wind was really stressing the trees in the area too. I was watching them swaying and stretching, and occasionally you could hear the groaning sound of one of the trees bending too far. Now, it is really important to understand how dark it was outside. I mean, it was very dark, and I doubt anyone would have been able to see me sitting on the porch, looking out over the neighborhood. Across the street and 2 houses down, I heard a noise. Looking over there, I noticed a figure standing in front of the front door of the house. I could only make out very minimal features of the man, though. The sound I heard seemed like a door slam, so I got the impression that he had been kicked out of the house or something. The man began banging hard on the door. I could hear the bangs clearly over all the sounds that the wind was making. He began yelling at whoever was in the house to let him in. His voice sounded crazed, but he didn't sound drunk to me. After banging for a bit, I suddenly heard the sound of a gunshot in his direction. It was only when he said he would fire again that I realized he had been the one to fire the gun. I froze in my chair, now fully scared. I heard the man yelling something like, "What are the police gonna do?" which made me think whoever was in the house called the police. I watched and waited to see what would happen. After a few moments, though, the man turned away from the house and began hurrying down the road. The scariest thing is that he was hurrying in the direction where my house was. I remained still. Like I said, it was dark and probably much darker on my porch, but I was still scared that this man with a gun would notice that I witnessed the whole thing. Fortunately, though, he hurried on by. He didn't even look in my direction, so I guess that he didn't notice me. It wasn't long before I heard the police sirens coming that way. I figured at that point it was best just to get into my house while I could. I assumed the police caught up with the guy and arrested him, but I don't really know. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. First, I would like to mention and thank my paid Patreon subscribers, starting with my 2 VIP members, Chiamerah Cat and Pixie Hopper 8. Also want to include Heidi H, Tracy Sellars, and Chronic J. I am a little behind in getting Patreon content up, but I promise I will catch up. I'm working to get 2 videos up by tomorrow, including this one, so 1 more, hopefully tomorrow if I can do it. And then I will begin getting some Patreon-only stories up to catch up with what I've been missing. Other than that, I'd like to mention and thank all of my free Patreon members: Vanakins, Rose Metro, Woofer McWooferson, Cindy Cleveland, Vanapira Rayne, Stinking Ooze, William H., Alien Unicorn 13, Kathryn Lynch, The Bama Guy 334, Michael Vasquez, Bonnie Lynn, Collet Bond, Krista Pike, Prince UVA, HF Creations, Bonnie Gibbs, Linda Moore, DJ Lira, and Evil Black Cat. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.